Please. You're almost as tall as your mom now, Eva. Uh-huh. All right, let's get started this morning. Thank you for being here on this beautiful day. It is just gorgeous. And to change my outfit this morning when I saw it was pretty brutal out with the it's good to be back with you, by the way. We went to Tennessee, obviously, and we had supposed to have bad weather for the first 3 days when we were there, and it actually was pretty nice the first 3 days, and then the last couple of days was a little bit more like this. So we kind of brought it down here, and but it's supposed to be warming up, to say the least, this week. So unfortunately. So thank you for being here this morning. Thank you for Wesley for filling in for me last week. I don't think last week was streamed, at least I didn't see it, so I couldn't to see what was discussed. But Wesley did tell me where we finished up, that we got through Job, and I'm not sure if I were here if we would have made it through Job, probably, but Wesley did a good job and got through Job. And this morning we will get into Joseph. But one thing I just wanted to, when I mentioned the mountains, every day I try to think about God's creation and how amazing it is. But there are particular times in my life, and you probably have this as well, where you can think of those, where it's pretty incredible what God's creation is. And whenever I visit the mountains is one of those times where I just in awe of God's creation. When you're at the beach and looking out over the vast water, especially if there's a sunset or sunrise on an airplane, when you're up in the sky and you can look out and see just how amazing God's creation. But the mountains is definitely one of the things that does that for me, when I look out and see the huge boulders of rocks and just the massive weight and how amazing our earth is. And to think that the earth is just a small little piece of what God has created for us to just be in awe of. So pretty amazing. So certainly thank God for the opportunity that we had to enjoy some time last week on vacation. Last week, Wesley finished up the section on Job. We're on page 74, 75, that we'll get into Joseph this week as we continue our discussion on why people suffer. And our particular topic here that we're looking at, remember, we're not alone. And certainly as we go through these particular characters in the Bible, that's one of the things I believe that God wants us to understand. And why we have these examples in the Bible is we're not alone. And we have these examples to help us along our journey, specifically, that we can look back at these individuals in the Bible and see how they handled their journey and how we can best develop our responses, if you will, to suffering, and how we're going to respond to it, how it's going to dictate or not dictate our lives and the pattern of our lives here on this earth, because we know we're going to face them, right? We know these things are going to come. These trials, these tribulations, these sufferings are going to happen in our life. These disappointments, they're going to be there. And so how are we going to be able to handle those circumstances when they come? I would like to go over the last paragraph, however, real quickly, just because I think it's an amazing paragraph and what he says here. He says, in like manner, when Peter focused on the waves and the winds, he took his mind off Jesus and began to sink. To keep from sinking and drowning amid life's adversities, we must not allow our emotional reactions to overshadow what we know. I think that's a big statement. If you look at our religious world today, if you will, our religion in our world today is so based on emotions, right? We let emotions get so involved in what we know or what we should know. And I think it's important that even with our trials and tribulations and struggles, we be careful not to let our emotions get the best of us. And I'm speaking just towards myself as I am to anyone else. Okay, because it's not easy to do. It's not easy when you're in these circumstances to not let your emotions control you, whatever it may be. I think we all could probably agree to that. So I think that's a huge statement there, to not let our emotions rule us in whatever it may be. And that can go for many things other than just struggles. But we must keep bringing our minds, our concentration, our thoughts back to the person of Jesus, discernible only through continual Bible study. Similarly, Paul was being told, if you remember back with Paul, his thorn in the flesh, was bearable if he would keep his focus on God and his favor. And James also pointed out, if you remember the discussion we had about the farmer, and how the farmer had to be patient, and how we need to be patient through our struggles and waiting for the answers from God. The prophets and Job all show that the key is to remain focused on God. No matter what it is, what we're going through, to remain focused on God. The distance between our current circumstances and the future state of release from adversity may be traversed only by remaining focused upon deity and spiritual reality. God's will as expressed through his written words. So we must use God's communication to us to be able to get through and make sure our minds stay focused on him and not get sidetracked in our walk. So with that being said, not knowing what was finalized last week in our discussion, any comments or comments you want to make, or any questions or any thoughts on Job? And obviously we spent a lot of time on him and his amazing story as we move into Joseph's story. Any other comments? All right, well, let's move on to page 75 as we talk about Joseph, which is obviously an amazing story in itself. And Joseph's life is absolutely incredible. And before we begin, Joseph, let's go to God in prayer. Father in heaven, we're so grateful for this morning. So grateful, Father, for allowing us to come together and have this opportunity this morning to open up your word, to be able to learn more from your Bible, to be able to understand, Father, the reasons that we suffer and why it can help build us up, how it can help build our character, how it can make us more beneficial, Father, to those around us. Help us this morning, Father, to remove everything out of our minds of the world this morning, that we would have the desire, Father, to learn more about you, Father, and the urgency, Father, to apply those things that we learned this morning to our lives, and we can become better people and be better Christians, Father, as we go out to the world and be an example for you and to be a light here in this area in Sorrento and abroad. Thank you for Jesus and all that he means to us. In his name we pray. Amen. All right, somebody could like to pick up reading for me, if you would, on Joseph. And if you could, it's a long second paragraph to say the least. Let's just do the first paragraph. Stop there, and then I'll have you do the second paragraph when we finish the first one. If anybody would like to read that for me there, starting on page 75. If anybody have an extra book for our visitors, that would be great. If you have an extra one. We're short on books, by the way. So. Okay. All right, page 75. Page 75.
Consider another fellow traveler with whom we can relate, Joseph. Here was a fellow who was hated by his brothers. Do you have kinfolk who are at odds with you? Joseph's brothers could not speak a kind word to him. Their jealousy was eventually whipped up to such a high pitch that they fully intended to kill him when they got him away from their father. Only at the admonition of the oldest brother did they agree not to shed his blood. But then, without that brother's knowledge, instead sold him into slavery. The trade caravan took the traumatized boy away from family, home, and country to a foreign country and culture where he could not even speak the language. There he is, placed on the auction block to be sold into the home of a high-ranking Egyptian official. Though he made the best of his situation and conducted himself above reproach. He was continually tormented by the sexual advances of the official's wife. His consistent moral resistance only landed him in prison, the product of false allegations from a woman scorned. Though he again distinguished himself within the prison system, enabling him to rub elbows with a special class of inmates who had been in Pharaoh's employ, his ability to interpret dreams was rewarded with 2 more years of prison time.
So here's another example. You know, if we take Job's life and see what happened to Job, right, and everything that took place in his life and what he lost. It's another extreme, if you will, here with Joseph, right? It's another extreme example that, as I mentioned before a couple of weeks ago, where if we try to put ourselves in these individuals' shoes, it can be difficult, right? Because so many of us are never going to experience anything like this. Some of us probably can say that we've experienced, in some aspects, some of it. But there's going to be situations, and an example here with Joseph, that we're going to say we've never experienced anything like it. And I think that is amazing as we look at Moses and then Jesus and the next couple here, that we have so many wonderful examples that no matter what we've been through in our life, there's a pretty good chance that with all the examples that we have, we're going to fit somewhere in these individuals' trials and tribulations and sufferings, right? And here Joseph, I mean, compared to Job, Job lost everything, right, that he had. And Joseph really didn't have, I guess you could say, obviously anywhere close to what Job had, right? But yet, boy, was his life altered. And did he miss so much in his life, especially his early childhood? Was it altered significantly by the events that took place? And Job obviously being older and still lost everything. So just an example of a different example of someone that's much younger and how his life was altered from such a young age, and then how he was able to change so many lives in history, if you will, and what Joseph did and what his whole life experience was, and how he turned something just horrible to something amazing. You got a comment? No? So anyway, that's my thoughts on that before we begin. That just a kind of a, not a full 180, if you will, from Job to Joseph, but kind of, a different life. But going to be very similar handling of how he goes about this. So, okay, yes.
I do have a comment after all, but Joseph, when Potiphar's wife, Potiphar went in, she made advances to him, and he ended up with 2 more years in jail or something like that, whatever it was. But it seems like we need to not worry sometimes about things happening so fast, because there he was in jail, and an opportunity came, and he became the second in charge of all of Egypt, So sometimes God uses what seems like us to be bad events to make it into something really good,
Mm-hmm.
Just need to be patient.
And his timing, right?
Hmm?
In his timing.
Yeah, right.
To a lot of times we think we're not getting answers to our prayers, but in essence we are in some way. So
Sometimes the answer is no, though.
sometimes the answer is no, or not now. Yes, Lydia.
Well, you said there are like 2 different stories, and I think that's illustrated in part in the way the suffering happens. I'm sorry, my throat's sore. In the way that suffering happens to the 2 of them. Job kind of has like everything going well, and then it all falls apart at once.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Joseph's life, he kind of gets like 1 step forward, 2 steps back.
Mm-hmm.
Like he keeps good thing happens, then really bad thing happens, and sometimes
Mm-hmm.
life is like the first way where everything seems to be going good, and then
Mm-hmm.
everything happens at once. And sometimes it's like a continual stream of bad things that keep wanting to happen to you. And it's
All right.
so it kind of illustrates, this is how you deal with the first kind of suffering. This is how you deal with the second kind.
All right. Exactly. Very good point. Agreed. All right. Valerie, you want to continue there, if you will, for the next long one?
Think of it, hated by family, threatened with death by brothers, sold by brothers into slavery, abandoned by his father, unjustly thrown into prison due to a completely bogus accusation, and left there for years. In fact, one gains insight into the extent and intensity of Joseph's suffering when, having risen to power in Pharaoh's favor at age 30, he marries an Egyptian girl and has 2 sons. The names he bestows on the 2 boys are insightful. The first, Manasseh, meaning one who causes to forget. Why would he so name his son? His explanation: for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. This simple observation is packed with meaning. Toil suggests hard labor, unending, relentless service to his captors. His prison time transpired in what we would call a dungeon, not in the nice air-conditioned hotels we provide criminals in America. When he was extricated from prison, they had to shave him and change his clothes. Joseph's allusion to all my father's house tells us he had been haunted all those years by memories of dad and home. He had been literally ripped from his unfinished childhood, taken away from everything in his life that he held dear and that gave him stability and contentment, and thrust into a foreign, unfriendly environment in which he endured mistreatment and untold hardship. The second son he named Ephraim, which means fruitful or productive. His rationale: for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Affliction speaks volumes. It could just as easily have been translated trauma, distress, or hardship. While you and I marvel and wonder what it would have been like to be second in command over all Egypt, Joseph was still hurting from the enormous long-term suffering he endured. He did not think of Egypt as a place where he now wielded great authority or enjoyed the niceties of privileged life. He thought of it as the land of his affliction. Indeed, Joseph bore deep emotional, psychological, and physical scars with which he lived the rest of his life. No doubt our suffering will never compare with his.
I had forgotten about his sons' names and what they meant. So I think it's extremely interesting how Manasseh, his explanation to name Manasseh, which meaning one who causes to forget, for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. So obviously, what he means by that is, I think, that he's able to put it behind him. For him to be able to continue and to move on, to completely remove from his memory would not be beneficial, right? Because he's going to use that as something that's going to benefit him, those trials and those tribulations. And it says later on, obviously he says here that he had deep emotional pain from, obviously, his brother's trying to wipe him out, basically, in his life. I mean, that's, can't think of many things that are that bad. So, that's had to be an enormous emotional strain on him, going through something like that. And then trying to forget and forgive. That had to be enormous. Natalie?
Oh, I was just going to say the example of forgiveness. I mean, I don't know that a lot of people could forgive. I would hope that I could in that situation, but boy, that went on for years. And we don't often think about the psychological damage that could have done to him.
Mm-hmm. Even to the point where, I think if it's me, I'm just, be straightforward. It's got to be to the point, everything that was at that point that happened that were bad, being stuck in, slavery and prison. Would you have been thinking that my life is nothing? My brothers have ruined me. Life is worthless. Those thoughts had to, for most people, come to the forefront. That I mean, they've completely ruined my life. They've just, most people I think would think nothing but evil towards them. And what's just anything bad to happen to them could want it to happen, right?
It shows his resilience. Like, it just shows how he kept trudging on, like his grit through life, you know, like just, I mean, he had to have been pretty special for, you know, obviously he was, but I'm saying for him to keep moving up the ranks, things like that,
Mhm.
the way he did, I know, you know, with the dreams and stuff, but.
Right. And certainly why I think his brothers were jealous of him in the first place. Yes, sir.
I'd say that probably always had good deep faith in God. He knew God was taking him somewhere, and he was going to go along for the ride, I guess, more or less, you know. But that Manasseh, name his son Manasseh, your children always want to be a little better than you are, you know, have a little more than you do. And maybe that's what he was trying to think there, you know. I'll make sure he doesn't get this, you know, his brothers don't cast him away somewhere or something, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
All these bad things he doesn't want to happen. And then Ephraim, it's, fruitful and productive, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of affliction. So it's interesting how he uses that, I think, as a drive, as a motivation that, and Natalie talked about he being special. He wasn't going to let his brothers get the best of him. He was going to come back. He was going to, obviously, as Gary said, with his faith, he was going to persevere. He was going to triumph. He was going to come through it. And you might be throwing it all at me now, and all these things are going to happen, that happening to me. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. God's with me. I'll get through it. And
I'm sure he had his moments when he thought maybe God had deserted him, though. But
sure,
that's just typical of a human.
sure, those thoughts had to be constantly there. That you're thinking that what's next, God? What's going to happen next? That's bad, that I'm not going to be able to handle, and or that I have to handle. And that's why, it's important for us using that example, because he had to be constantly thinking that, am I alone here? Is God still with me? Is God still with me? All these things that are happening, is he really still? Job surely was wondering that. Obviously, we know that for sure based on all his discussions, but Joseph had to be having the similar things going through his head. All these bad things are happening to me, and one after another. And is God still there? Is he still with me? Is he still going to help me through this? Is there light somewhere through this, on all this darkness? Is there light somewhere at the end of this? Gary.
Especially after the one servant that wasn't killed, and, he told him what was gonna happen in the future, the baker and the butler. I think especially after he did that, and that person went back into the service of the king or what, Pharaoh, and nothing happened from it. I think that's a point where he was probably praying to God, let this person go in there and remember me to the Pharaoh, and everything will be okay, and nothing happened. I think he didn't lose faith then.
Yeah, he wasn't going to lose faith. Yeah.
I think sometimes we need to sit down at different phases of our life and just kind of analyze where we're at. In other words, what things I want to accomplish, did I get them done? And, spiritually and physically and, financially in our lives and everything. Because God wants us to be organized. He wants us to have good lives, And I know I've always, every 3 or 4 years, whatever, I always financially sit down and thought about, where am I at now, where am I going to go? And spiritually the same way.
Mm-hmm.
If we do that, we'll realize that maybe some of these things were just tests for us to make us a better person, to make us a stronger Christian.
And Joseph had to realize that, right? He had to.
Right.
He had to. Natalie.
We often talk about, with Job and now Joseph, how extreme, their afflictions were. But really, I feel like this is many people's story. I know that, I was a sold into slavery and all these things, but there's people that suffer for a long time from childhood all the way up, and then they wear psychological damage but rise above that.
Mm-hmm.
And are resilient and learn to love God and follow God and are obedient under. I think we don't always see that we have people doing that right in front of us all over. I mean, we look at these cases and we look at these situations in the Bible and we can't even fathom it, but I think if we really looked around, there's a lot of people that have suffered throughout their lives and rise above it
Yeah. Even,
with God.
yes, even, among us here, even within the United States, which we're spoiled, let's face it, for the most part. I mean, but we still have a lot of examples within the United States, but certainly in other countries. There are many facing these type of trials and tribulations right now. I was just reading something about Haiti, what Haiti is going through right now, and about they're just scared for their kids to walk to school. Just the uprising that's going on there, and it's just everyone, the fearing for their life, and the evil that's taking place, and it's happening all around us in our world, and sometimes we're in a little cocoon kind of a little bit here. Not that it doesn't happen here in the United States.
Closed doors,
Mm-hmm.
You may think you know.
Right.
But there's things that happen even in the United States, even in the home, in your neighborhood.
Right.
You don't know what's going on, and people are trying to live through that, and, that's just another thing where we need to be out sharing the gospel, because, they need to know. I know that, I don't know. I'm just thinking of struggles and trials and tribulation of people now too,
Right.
and the resilience.
Right. And how we could help. Good comments. Anything else? So a few things that I jotted down in reference to Joseph, and a lot of them have actually already been mentioned, but I want to say them anyway. But Joseph, some of the things that happened in his life, he went from a pit to a palace. He went from rags to riches. He was a dreamer, wasn't he? Somebody already mentioned that. He was a dreamer. So is there anything wrong with being a dreamer? No? I don't think so. He was a dreamer. He labored as a slave. He won the confidence of God. God had confidence in Job, didn't he? Yeah. God had obviously a lot of confidence in Joseph. He was obviously a pretty good-looking guy, but that never became a snare or a stumbling block to him. He resisted temptation. And I don't want to use this just for the example of Potiphar's wife or whatever, but so many things that he could have been tempted from, obviously, and things that we probably don't even know about, that he had to resist. That obviously just God knew that he was going to be able to handle those situations. This one's good too when we talk about patience. He was silent in the midst of false accusations and the appearance of being guilty or even having an unjust punishment. He was silent. He let his character speak for itself.
Same way. The father said, I've got your fate in my hands. Why don't you speak? Why don't you try to defend yourself? He didn't say a word.
That's why a lot of the things that we're talking about with Job and Joseph are very similar to Christ, right? A lot of it. Amazingly. He was unspoiled by sudden prosperity. He did not yield to pride. And I think a lot of what he went through in his life, his experiences, allowed that. That he had nothing. He had nothing. He was nobody. And to go through all that gave him a tender heart. A heart that God could mold and shape, and it was soft, pliable, easy to transform, that no matter his status of where he was going to go, he wasn't going to look down upon anyone. And that was so big in forgiving his brothers, right? So big. To yield to pride. Did not let pride get in the way, which what would most people, 99% of people probably have done immediately when you got that power and that control. Let's get revenge. Let's, wow. This is what my brothers did to me. They're not really my brothers. They wouldn't. They wouldn't do that to me. Let me get revenge on them. Wow. Boy, what an opportunity he had to do so, didn't he? He didn't let the prison walls define him. That would have been the easiest time to give up. To say it's done, it's over. This is about this. I can't get any worse. Woe is me. God, you've deserted me.
Paul and Silas singing when they're in the Philippian jail there.
Mm-hmm. Similar situation, right? He constantly, obviously through this, had to constantly lean on God. He acknowledged God all the time. So his faith was strong. It was obviously grounded from a very young age. And he allowed this to have these things to well, I guess you could say, to improve his wisdom. He became wiser through each experience. That allowed him to be an unbelievable leader. He showed brotherly love. Whew, did he ever show brotherly love? And somebody mentioned it earlier that he returned good for evil. That's almost how he used every situation, right? You know, if something evil happens to me, something evil comes my way, I'm not going to return it with evil. I'm going to return it with good. You know, say when he's talking about turning the other cheek, giving your jacket off of your back for someone else. Joseph is just a beautiful example of all that.
That's Jesus.
Mm-hmm. And I think this, to me, this kind of statement kind of wraps up his life and kind of wraps up this book, sort of. But Joseph did not allow misery or triumph to interfere with his divine destiny.
His love for men, his love of people. And when he recognized his brothers and they came to get wheat from him, he went back and cried for a while. And he got himself back together and went back and talked to him. Go back to my father, really. I think Benjamin too, when the son, you want to see him.
Mm-hmm. Again, just the emotions of it all. It's hard for me, to think about all the emotions he had to be experiencing through all of that, and how he was able to handle it.
If there was ever a time for revenge, that would have been it right there.
That would have certainly been it.
I'm not going to sell you any wheat, go back to where you came from. What you doing?
It's when I think about, some people say, well, these are just stories. They didn't really happen. You know, these are just stories. Could never have happened, right? That's what some people say in our world, that, you know, the Bible is made up of just so many of these stories. But when I think about God's wisdom and Him using these lives, because these are people's lives, right, that God used, really, for us, for all of mankind, to document these things for us to be able to read and to be able to glean from, and to almost experience it ourselves. In His wisdom, He put these there for us. To me, it's incredible to take these events of these individuals and have them documented for us. This is incredible in itself for me, to grasp what God did. And then we can't take them lightly. We've got to lay hold on these examples and these afflictions, and to truly understand them as real events, and not think of them as just these stories that just happened. Right, Natalie?
It's interesting how God, the greatest examples, obviously Jesus being the greatest of all, greatest examples for us are in the Bible, faced so much adversity and so many struggles in life. So, you know, but overcame that because God was with them.
Mhm.
They were faithful to God.
Mm-hmm.
It is, in the New Testament, talks about being lukewarm.
Right.
If we're always just kind of trying to avoid situations, we're never going to experience the misery or the triumphs. And we're never, you know, like, you can't think life is just going to be, you know, I'm going to try to keep it as, you know, peaceful. Like, we want to be peaceful, but I guess middle of the road, you know what I mean? You're going to face trials and
Right,
tribulations,
right.
and that's where you've got, that's where you can show your faith.
Exactly. That's where your faith shines.
It shines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. What if, and here goes my my brain again, and what if Joseph was faced with a situation where he had a choice to make between his brothers' lives and his life? What choice would you think he would have made? I'm just throwing out a hypothetical, right? If he had a choice that's either I'm going to die or I'm going to give my life for my brothers, what would he have done? There's no doubt in my mind. No doubt.
Not only because of his brothers and what he thought of them, loved them, but his father,
Mhm.
for his father to lose in his sons.
Yes.
He couldn't
Yes.
stand that.
That's his faith in God. He knew that if he did lose his life, he'd be a lot better on the other side. Just like Abraham with Isaac. He knew with Isaac, he could raise him right back up in a heartbeat, because he said, God told him, so I'm going to bless all nations through him.
So even though Joseph had all that, he was still selfless, wasn't he? He showed selflessness all the time. And I think that's a perfect example of Job and Joseph's lives. That they were not selfish at all. And I think Valerie said they thought of others before themselves. They always thought of others before themselves. And that's a good place to end. We'll start next week on Moses. And hopefully we'll get through Moses and Jesus next week at the same time and start on the conclusion. And thank you very much for the wonderful comments again this morning and everybody being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you.